everybody, I'm Roxy, this is Rec Me BS, and today I bring you my April wrap-up. I should have split this video into two videos because I have a lot of books to tell you about. Let's just play hard mode. We'll see whether I end up with a really eloquent and to the point video or more likely a really rambly long video. But in any case, April was a very weird reading month because I read some of the best books I've read in my whole life, but I also had a lot of disappointments and a lot more DNFs than I usually have. I have decided to split this video into leftovers from March, disappointments, and we'll end up on a high note just to celebrate life with highlights. Let's just get into it because again, this video is going to be super long. I finished my reread of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone illustrated edition. Like I've said on multiple occasions, if you're going to revisit this series, I think the illustrated version is just the right way to go. It's just a work of art. I also finished my reread of Emma by Jane Austen. Totally held up. Of the Austens I've read, this is the most complex in character, and it's also the most modern, which I think is really evidenced in the new Emma movie that feels very fresh and very modern while at the same time being quite faithful to the book. In case you don't know, this is about a 21-year-old woman. She's an only child. She's kind of the mistress of her house because her mom passed away when she was really young. She's told by everyone she's super smart, and she is to a degree, but she also misinterprets the world around her severely, and it's hilarious, it's chaotic. So yeah, it's my favorite Jane Austen. It's one of my favorite books of all time. One book that I should have wrapped up in the Irish Readathon wrap-up, linked down below as always, is a play that I read for that called I Know My Own Heart by Emma Donoghue. So this is a collection of 5 of her plays. This is the only one I've read so far, and it's about Annie Lister, aka Gentleman Jack. In case you don't know, she was a Victorian era, I think, woman who lived like a man in order to retain her position and to command authority. I believe, I haven't read the biography yet. She was also a lesbian, and she wrote very explicit diaries that were censored when they were first found, but now have been republished, and there's been a sort of resurgence of interest in her. And the play is about her relationship with her aristocratic best friend and also a peasant woman, and it was terrible. It pains me to say this because Emma Donoghue is amazing. I've read some other stuff by her and she's brilliant, but this play I found lacked the basic elements. There was no conflict, or no, there was a conflict. It's just that the way the scenes were laid out, it was so awkward and strange, and the dialogue was terrible. I just didn't enjoy it one bit, and I might get to the rest of the plays, but for now I kind of want to just take a break. Then I finished Moby Dick by Herman Melville. Oh my god, this was so fun. I mean, yes, it's good, it's a classic, it's beautifully written, it has a lot of layers and symbolism, but apart from that, it's just such an entertaining story. Ishmael, the narrator, is such a nerd, and I loved it. He was so enthusiastically telling you about whales history, whales in art, whales anatomy, and also he's so sharp to detect tensions between people in the ship. If you're intimidated by this, I get it, but believe me, it's not that long. It's actually only 650 pages, which of course it is a longer book, but it's not like a mammoth. And the chapters are really short, and the language is not dense. I think this just gets a bad rep. Speaking of which, this is the Barnes & Noble Classic Edition, introduced by Carl F. Hooved. I read the introduction after reading the book. There is a section here where he discusses a scene early on in the novel where Ishmael meets Queequeg, who is a savage man. The whole point of it is that Ishmael realizes he's not a savage, and they will have to share a room at a hotel. Well, not a hotel, but you know what I mean. And they end up putting their sort of religious differences aside, and it is strongly implied that they have sex, right? And my friend Carl here is not very into that. He says, let's not twist Melville's words to attach special meanings to them that obscure his work. That's ridiculous, because here's a guy who attaches significance to every little word and possible symbolism that Melville uses. The language there is very much associated with wedding, and like the word bride is used, and the word embrace and love. And I'm not saying that they were like in a gay relationship as we would understand now. It is a point that runs through the whole book, so it's just hilarious to me that Carl here was so reluctant to comment on that. That was not important for my review of the book. I just thought it was interesting and I wanted to share. Then 2 books that are not exactly DNFs, but I'm definitely not currently reading them. Let's begin with The Shakespeare Requirement by Julie Schumacher. So this is a campus novel. It's about a guy who has just been appointed the chair of the English department, and his ex-wife is sleeping with the dean, so he thinks he'll have a really hard life. He's also kind of an outsider because I think he's a writer and not like a full-on academic. The prose is okay. It's like very thick on the humor, like no subtlety whatsoever, which sometimes is fine. It's just that I was reading a lot of like middling stuff by then, and I just wasn't in the mood for more of that. I wanted something more meaty. I think I will want to pick it up after having read something like super heavy, perhaps. We'll see. And then In the Land of Men by Adrienne Miller. So I talked about this on my Reading Rush tag. I'll just link it down below. And I mentioned how Britta Bowler had said that this was much more about Adrienne Miller's relationship with David Foster Wallace than her work as an editor of Esquire. And for the first 150 pages even, that was not the case. It was pretty much about Adrienne Miller growing up and coming of age and coming to New York. In the Land of Men sort of referred both to the work environment that was very male-centered, but also her starting to date. At first I thought, oh my god, this is amazing. Then I was like, well, the tone is a bit young and it is a bit indulgent. It could have been better edited, which is completely ironic. David Foster Wallace is kind of looming in the background. It's not well handled because she assumes that we're just ready to accept how amazing David Foster Wallace was. And if she was going to make that argument, she needed to actually make the argument. By the time David Foster Wallace makes an appearance, I was already kind of sick of her writing. For a book that is about something so specific, it was weirdly unfocused. The only reason I haven't DNF'd this is because I do love literary gossip, and I kind of feel if I don't finish this, I might miss out on some like interesting tidbits, but also because the first section was really insightful, and I feel like I might encounter a bit of that near the end as well, hopefully. Then I want to tell you about an actual DNF. That was Hera Lindsay Bird by Hera Lindsay Bird. This is a poetry collection that I was really looking forward to. Let me tell you, I have never tried to get into a book so much as I tried with this one. It was because Hera Lindsay Bird has a really vivid imagination. She has a knack for wit and for uncommon metaphors that are interesting and feel very fresh and now. It's just that the poems themselves are not very good. And it's so interesting to me that a lot of the praise for this poet comes from her ability to read poems aloud. You can perform something in so many different ways. That's what makes performance interesting. But that doesn't necessarily mean that like when you write it on the page it's going to be good, or that you're reading exactly what you wrote on the page. If you are releasing a book that people are supposed to read, then the poems should be well constructed. But it's not only just like the form of the poem, also line by line. As I said, some of the metaphors and imagery was amazing and some other was just ridiculous, and it was like put in the worst way possible. There was one poem that I thought was actually quite good. It's called Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, but it just made me sad. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is about a young woman trying to sleep as much as she can, and for this she enlists the help of her crazy therapist who prescribes her pills. And she works in an art gallery and she's like a very waspy, young, beautiful woman. A lot of the criticism towards this book comes from the fact that she is such a privileged young woman and people hate that. I don't care. I'll take an existentialist ennui story from wherever it comes. I'm a sucker for them. I was supposed to love this, but I just couldn't get into the writing. I just thought it was so bland, structurally also. There's actually this section that I read for the literary quotation quaternion tag, linked down below. I thought it should have started with this, which is all her musings on sleep and her relationship with her mother, and that sort of set the character for me. But before that, I just didn't understand who she was and why she was doing that. And I think it is because Ottessa Moshfegh is relying a lot on people's perception of the main character based on who she is to carry character construction. I thought she was compelling. It's just the writing and the structure. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. It was a very visceral reaction because I had been reading a lot of disappointing things. So I feel like I had less tolerance for that. So I might revisit this in the future. One of my dear friends told me how it ended, and I think the ending is quite interesting. But I'm not going to read 300 pages of a book for the last 10 pages. If that's the case, then do a short story. Tell me if it's worth my time. Tell me if I'm crazy. Okay, moving on with the disappointments. This is a very short story called Spring Sleepers by Kyoko Yoshida. This is like a very fabulous tale of insomnia, which I should have liked. I just thought it was being whimsical for whimsy's sake. I don't think there was anything particularly interesting. However, there is an essay at the end called Norwich, the City of Writing, which talks about world literature and this author actually writing both in English and Japanese, and I thought that part was fascinating, so I actually would encourage you to pick this up only for the essay. Then we come to the study of animal languages, which, if ever the word train wreck was used, it started really interestingly. I talked about how the beginning was like so strong. By the way, it's about two academics. They are married, they have been married for a while, and she's supposed to be like the more brilliant one. She is an ornithologist and she's researching animal communication. She's about to give a very important lecture and her father comes to stay with them, and her father is bipolar. And it's narrated through Ivan, the husband's eyes. What I think is one of the strengths of this book is that the writing, even if it's first person point of view, allows for you to see that Ivan is a really complex character. It does let the dissonance between Ivan's perceptions and the reality shine through the prose, which I think it's rare and it's well done. But other than that, oh my god, this ends up in such a crazy place, but not in a good way. What happened, Lindsay? It gets to a point that it's so ridiculous and so like telenovela. And I guess if you like that sort of thing, go ahead, pick it up. That book I am not keeping. The next book, I don't really know how to review that well because I don't know how much of my disappointment with the book was my background interfering with what the book was trying to do versus what are really shortcomings of the book. But let's give it a shot. This is Because Internet, Understanding the New Rules of Language by Gretchen McCulloch. Gretchen McCulloch is a pop linguist that I really like. I really respect her efforts to bring linguistics to everyone. And this was supposed to be all about internet language conventions. I think a lot of people thought it was going to be about how the internet influences our language, but I don't think the book promises that. The main argument here is that informal writing is unique because there's never been such an immediacy through a written medium, and all of that is super true. But then what happened? This book is a lot about the history of internet, and I think that's okay. You always need some contextual information about a language, but this was way too much. I found that this was so unfocused. There were some tidbits of information that were really interesting and useful. Half my degree was linguistics. I have studied internet language, I have studied memes, and I'm also like a native or almost native internet speaker slash user, so maybe I was not like the target audience for this, but let it be known that I read a lot of pop linguistics books and I enjoy them. One of my favorite linguistics books is A Little Book of Language by David Crystal, and that is super basic, but it's so good and so to the point and so compelling. But this was just, I don't know, she seemed very defensive. Instead of describing internet language, she tried to convince us internet language is something worth researching and worth thinking about, which if you pick up this book, you already think. If you read the chapter titles, it sounds like great, but it wasn't. And it also includes a lot of like memoir aspects to it. Would I recommend it? As far as I know, there's not another book that is like so general public. A couple of books that I think are much better on the topic. It might be much denser and much more academic, so but if you do check it out, please let me know what you think. Now let's move on to the highlights. One of the first books that I read in the month of April was actually Bowie. I absolutely adore this, but if you don't already love David Bowie or you are looking for an actual graphic biography, this is not your book. This is terribly written, okay? But I don't think that matters because it's like a visual dream and it's much more about the aesthetics and like the Easter eggs and celebrating Bowie than like teaching you about him. I loved it. I think it was worth every penny. And just like a final asterisk, this is covering specifically his time as Ziggy Stardust. Another book that I think it's not that well done, but I thoroughly enjoyed was Faber and Faber, The Untold Story by Toby Faber. This is an oral history, meaning a collection of documents telling the story of Geoffrey Faber and how he started the Faber and Faber imprint and how he had it survive. Also, there are a lot of T.S. Eliot letters here, a lot about his career, which was fascinating. And I'm just so interested in what they do and how they do it, especially because they have like a very strong commitment to poetry. They also took a lot of risks, but also didn't at some point, and it kind of analyzes all of that. Objectively speaking, this is a weird mix of too much cropping versus not editing enough. So like I would have liked a little bit more, especially at the beginning, editorial direction and a bit more contextual notes, but there are also letters that are too chopped that I would have liked, perhaps not in full, but in fuller, if that makes sense. It's still super enjoyable, especially from a historical point of view. I think this is a good book to pick up. It's a good resource. Then a really short one. This is The Girl Who's Getting Married by Aoko Matsuda, translated by Angus Turville. And this is a very short story about a woman who's about to visit her friend who is getting married. And you start feeling there has been some tension between them. They haven't spoken in a while. But as she climbs the stairs and reminisces, things don't add up. The memories begin to contradict each other. And then you're left thinking, what the F? I actually read this twice. It's great. I totally recommend it. Then I read This is Shakespeare by Emma Smith. Oh my god, Emma Smith is that professor I wish I can become one day. She is amazing. So this is a collection of lectures talking about Shakespeare's most famous plays, but from a perspective of their gappiness. The book's main argument is that what makes Shakespeare so interesting, apart from his poetry, is that he leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And she goes into some of those debates, sometimes looking back at Shakespeare's context, sometimes looking at production history, sometimes looking at the text. I love this. This is a great way to go deeper. Maybe not your first approach to Shakespeare, but like your second one, if you see what I mean. I must say though, because I saw this on one review, apparently these are a shorter, lighter version of her Oxford podcast series. I haven't listened to that, but I might check them out now. Someone who had listened to all of those lectures thought this was actually more introductory than that. I can't attest to that. And he did mention that those are free access, which, you know, if you don't want to cough up the bucks for this book, that's totally valid. But I do think there is value in this being so succinct and so approachable and in written form. This is Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. I finally read this. I loved it, but I am glad I didn't read it sooner. I think it was a good time to read it because I read this in a day. This is, again, kind of an oral history because it tells the story of Lincoln's son's death by pulling from different fake sources, and you know I love that. Of course, this also operates as commentary on historical interpretation. Some of the accounts focus on different things and also even contradict each other, but then it gets supernatural with Willie and other spirits being in the limbo. So when Lincoln goes to the cemetery to look at his child, the book goes into the lives of these people. Do I think sometimes it's like a bit too much, like a tad? Yes, but On other occasions, I thought they were spot on. They were so powerful. And the ending, of course, I won't say what it is, but oh my god. Another one of the best books I've read all year, Close Range, Brokeback Mountain and Other Stories by Annie Proulx. Yes, this is a movie tie-in cover. I am a basic bitch sometimes. The original title of this, I think, was Close Range, Wyoming Stories, or Stories of Wyoming, because all the stories are set in Wyoming. And they aim to capture life there. Annie Proulx is so good at that sense of place. Her prose is so just raw and honest because it's not flowery, but it's also not bare bones. All the stories are slightly different, like all the voices and all the viewpoints are slightly different. It was really impressive. What I will say is that the sense of pace is not necessarily there. Annie Proulx mentions in the introduction that she finds short stories difficult. I think that shows a bit, but it's like she's trying different rhythms. It was only possible because this is not her usual form. As I said, I haven't read anything else by her yet, but I'm looking forward to it now. My favorite stories were, of course, Brokeback Mountain. That one made me cry, and I read it like 3 times. Right before that one, there is one called 55 Miles to the Gas Pump, that it's like literally 2 pages, and it's chilling. It's so good. Job History was so good too. The whole collection I think was really strong. I also finished my reread of Cork Dork, a wine-fueled journey into the art of sommeliers and the science of taste by Bianca Bosker. This was a delight, and this is also one of the best nonfiction books that I've ever read. Of course, it's not life-changing in its topic, but I think that highlights all the more the craft in this book. I have never read a book that has taught me so much the cold hard facts while weaving so seamlessly personal journey / memoir and scientific research and other people's feelings and appreciation about the same journey. It was just fascinating to reread. So Bianca Bosker was formerly a tech reporter. She quits to become a sommelier. And what's so funny is that at the beginning, she doesn't even get wine. I mean, she likes wine in the same way that most adults like wine. She just finds fascinating that other people can be so obsessed with wine. And so she sets out to find out why, find out how you can measure wine quality, why people would spend thousands of dollars on wine, how expectations for somms are most times very elitist, and if there can be an alternative to that, and how would that look like. It just encompasses so many things. It's interesting because in a way, yes, it's just wine, and Bosker recognizes this and she explores that question, but at the same time, all of her answers and her journey and even her questions can be applied to anything that has to do with taste, music, food, art. And so that's why I think this book actually has more resonance that people can give it credit for. I think it's one of my favorite books. I'm just so impressed by it. Then finally, I want to talk about a new favorite, Befriend by Sigrid Nunes. I finally picked this up. This is a story of a woman whose friend has just committed suicide and she needs to take care of his dog, who's a Great Dane, and that is highly inconvenient because she lives in a place where dogs aren't allowed. So she's dealing with that while at the same time trying to process her grief. Her relationship to her friend was very close, of course, but also was kind of charged because he had been her professor and she always had a sort of crush on him, but they never really were anything more except once where they slept together. And he sort of symbolizes this very white and male side of academia, whereas she is kind of a contrast to that and she questions all of that. This is a very bookish book. I love this. Okay, once again, this is like exactly my type of book, a very thin plot with a lot of intertextual references and a lot of questions, but I would say that this book is unique in its treatment because it has plot twists. There was a section that I just needed to keep reading because I needed to know what would happen. I also think that some writing devices here could have gone really badly, but actually worked quite well. Although I don't think it's like 100% perfect book, I think it's really rather close. I think it does exactly what it sets out to do, and it does it with a lot of compassion and even humor, but it's still respect for its topic. The writing here is great, and I'm really excited I read it because it was good. I'm so happy that I did this video in that order because I ended up thinking about all the great books that I read this month, and so now I'm very excited. If you like this video, as always, please like and subscribe, share, spread the love, talk to me about these books or about books that you read this month and you loved or that you hated. That's always fun to read. Okay, see you next time.